And joining us now on Bloomberg is Andrew Adams, the director of the Justice Department's KleptoCapture task force, which was set up, of course, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine to go after the assets of Russian oligarchs. He's back with us now. Director Adams, thanks for joining us again on Bloomberg.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So you're in Paris today. What work is the Department of Justice working on in France?
So every single action that we have taken in this effort over the past 9 months has involved, in a very direct way, foreign partners across the world. And that's true in France. It's been true in the far reaches of the Pacific. It's been true in the Baltic. So I'm here meeting with folks from the Ministry of Justice and elsewhere from around the French government, and working with our law enforcement representatives from the United States who are based here in Paris, liaising with their counterparts across the French law enforcement world.
Are you planning seizures of Russian property while you're there? Does French law allow for that?
So not to get into specifics of particular operations or particular cases, but we're certainly working towards those goals in a number of cases and across the world. We have worked closely with French counterparts over several months. And while we're here, we'll have team members meeting with folks in Monaco, folks in the European Commission, and people in London, all in service of seizing assets where the opportunity presents itself.
That's
to your question about French authorities, I'm certainly...
Sorry, continue.
And on French authorities and what the French law allows, I'd certainly defer to French Ministry of Justice on this. But as you and your viewers may well know, there's been a lot of activity on the legislative front and on the regulatory front throughout Europe to allow broader authority for exactly that kind of action.
So to what extent are you cooperating with other countries, and to what extent has that cooperation increased since the task force was launched?
To a great extent. We cooperate with other countries on a daily basis. Like I say, there has not been an action that we've taken, including seizures and arrests that have happened in the United States, that hasn't involved some direct assistance from foreign counterparts. We simply cannot do this work without building international cases against the targets that we're going after.
Well, you helped to introduce us to the KleptoCapture task force here on Bloomberg back in spring. We spoke in April. I wonder how many billions of dollars, if it isn't billions, in assets have you seized in this time, Director?
The value of even a handful of the larger assets is multiple hundreds of millions of dollars. We've seized yachts, multiple yachts across the world. We have moved for forfeiture on luxury villas in the United States and assisted foreign partners to do the same. There is an effort to not only seize and forfeit, but to freeze and block the access to billions of dollars of goods, both in the United States and around the world.
So you've been at this for months. Of course, this began following Russia's invasion in Ukraine, and a good deal of time has passed. The idea was to clamp down, increase sanctions, get people like you working, and try to defund the war effort. Here we are more than 9 months later, and the war is still ongoing. Is Russia finding loopholes? Are there ways around the sanctions and the work that you're doing to help fund the war effort?
So we've certainly seen an impact on the Russian economy broadly as a result of the imposition of sanctions both in the United States and around the world. And that includes sanctions and export controls on sensitive technology. We've seen seizures, for example, of nuclear proliferation technology, dual-use military technology, and the like. All of that does have an impact and a direct impact on Russia's ability to fund itself and to conduct this conduct this war. That's only going to continue as we move forward, and that includes efforts by our counterparts here in France and around the European Union.
So where is the money coming from? Is it the sale of energy? How is Russia funding continued war operations, realizing that they may have taken a hit here economically, or maybe a massive hit, but they're still able to fund this conflict, Director?
Certainly, energy sales is a part of that, and I'll defer to the experts at Treasury and elsewhere to talk about the exact most profitable funding flows for the Russian economy. What I will say
Have you
is
seen
that
evidence of
to the extent
sanctioned
that there are
Russians using
sanctions in-
cryptocurrencies to try to get around the rules?
There are public reporting regarding cryptocurrency usage, in particular with respect to the funding of paramilitary groups, and it's at the top of the priority list for us to be looking at that. I've talked about this to some degree in the past. We want to look very closely at the use of cryptocurrency and other forms of non-fiat based money laundering, including through the sale of goods across borders, in order to plug loopholes where we see them.
You mentioned the seizure of super yachts. These are the stories that tend to make big headlines. As you know, obviously the images are hard to ignore here. I understand you've seized two, one of them in Spain. How come you haven't gone after more?
Well, it's not to say we aren't and won't go after more, and it's not to say that we haven't provided information to foreign partners who've taken their own action under their own authorities. That said, part of the issue here is that these things are movable. We wanted to take quick action early on in the task force to lock down the assets where we had the facts and the law would allow for us to take a warrant to a judge and get a seizure under place. As time goes on, those assets continue to move, sometimes without their location monitoring systems on, and can get into jurisdictions where the likelihood that we will be able to effect a seizure, even if our investigation demonstrates that there's a sanctions violation, diminishes over time. That said, even in jurisdictions where it's hard to effect the seizure, we're still taking action. We've seen warrants roll out for luxury jets, for example, across the world that will take time to actually effect the seizure. But what we have done through those actions is speak publicly in the way that the Department of Justice is able to speak publicly. And that is through our warrants, through our affidavits, through our process, to demonstrate to the private sector and to our foreign partners the extent of sanctions evasion and specifics with respect to shell corporations and methods of evasion, so that everyone in the private sector and around the world has insight into those networks as we are continuing to pursue those assets.
It is true, Director, that you have to pay when you seize a super yacht to keep it running, to maintain the yacht. How expensive is that?
Depending on the size of the yacht, it can be quite expensive. And the notion there is, in part, one of maximizing resale value at the end of what can be a lengthy process. And the other is a due process question. At the end of the day, we plan to succeed in all of these forfeiture actions, but we have an obligation to maintain that property up till the day that we are able to sell it. But that's an undertaking that we're prepared to continue. It's one that is funded for the yachts that we have under our control today. And we take that obligation seriously, and we're going to move these cases as quickly as we can.
You testified back in September, noting before the Senate Banking Committee that one of the goals of targeting the wealth of oligarchs was to get them to cooperate, Director. I wonder if you've been successful, to what end you have, and what information you would be looking for from them.
Yeah, I think the goal of sanctions is in part to incentivize a change of behavior and to make non-cooperation with the United States in general as uncomfortable as it can possibly be. And that's the point of the sanctions, that through our criminal tools and through our civil forfeiture tools, we are looking to emphasize as much as possible. That said, people in this oligarch set are at times extremely well connected to targets of investigations, to subjects of investigations. And we don't rule out the possibility that a change of behavior may also involve cooperation against other people in that same set.
Mm-hmm. There's an effort on Capitol Hill here in Washington to craft legislation that would essentially make it easier to forfeit the assets of sanctioned Russian oligarchs and use the money to fund the war in Ukraine. Is that a necessary authority that you need? Do you see that happening?
It is certainly important that we have legislation in place to aid with the reconstruction and to allow us to take forfeited funds and direct those to Ukraine, which is the victim of this illegal war, but not necessarily what the current law would allow for the recipient of the funds to be. That's a critical piece that we're working with people on the Hill to craft. And beyond that, we have tools available to take some significant action today. We will continue to take significant action, including seizures, including arrests, and including arrests around the world in pockets of the world where people might otherwise think that they are safe from arrest. And even if nothing changes in terms of what the law allows, that's a tool that we'll continue to use.
What happens if that doesn't pass, though, Director? Is there a way around that, or do you have to sit on this money that's been forfeited in the meantime?
No, there are going to be some options in terms of how we can dispose of the assets. There's flexibility and some discretion that's allowed in the law today to ease that process and to make that process one that is rational, logical, and set in a way that everybody can understand. The additional authority is what we've asked for.
Andrew Adams, Director of the Department of Justice's KleptoCapture Task Force. Keep us posted on your progress in Paris, and thanks for joining us again today on Bloomberg.
Thanks again.